The following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Frankly Speaking. I'm your host, Frank Saberic, and I'm really excited about my show today. The last time we talked about, just before going into Father's Day weekend, about the New Hampshire Father's Rights Movement. Very eloquent. We had a very eloquent speaker. And that same individual, I guess when he was going through his divorce, he kind of got hit with the double whammy of both child support and alimony. So when I went through my divorce, I kind of avoided the alimony part. But then again, I didn't make that much money. It's one of those type things. I'll probably get into that some other time. But anyway, our guest today, who's also not only with the New Hampshire Father's Rights Movement, he's also an Alimony Reform Activist, Tim Bickford. Tim, how you doing today?
I'm doing fine, thank you.
And that episode, incidentally, I mean, that was one of my more popular episodes. It got 200 views on YouTube. A couple of ladies commented on that. You know, a lot of times on YouTube videos, they don't comment unless they, have something strong to say. But I know you put that on a couple of, the New Hampshire Father's Rights Movement Facebook page,
right,
along with probably like some alimony type websites too.
Correct. First of all, I'd like to thank you again for having me.
Sure.
It's a privilege. I enjoyed it last time, and I was really looking forward to today. So thank you for that. Yes, and so when you released the video to me on the Father's Rights discussion that we had, I posted it on the New Hampshire Father's Rights group on Facebook, and it received quite a lot of attention there. I also belong to several alimony reform groups on Facebook, and I took liberties and posted it. I was quite proud of the video, so I posted it there as well, and got some good feedback. In fact, I got some feedback from a few women who I guess felt a little compelled to explain their situations because they both had custody of their children, and I think they kind of felt like maybe because I knew them personally, that maybe they thought that I thought they were doing something wrong, or but everyone's situation is different. But anyways, it was well received.
Okay. Now, before we go in full throttle, take the nesty plunge, so to speak, in the subject of alimony, one thing that kind of slipped through the cracks that I thought about on my way home after that show was the subject of fathers who tap into DNA evidence sometimes to kind of vindicate themselves. And, usually they... if they get compelling things from, DNA forensic evidence, then they usually don't have to pay the child support.
Right.
And do you have any experience with that in New Hampshire?
Well, in New Hampshire, yes, but I would really like to share
Sure.
another story with you about that I've recently discovered. It's absolutely amazing. You remember the comedian Sam Kinison, right?
Yeah.
Well, keep that in your memory for a second, if you will. There's a gentleman by the name of Carl LeBove, who was a friend of Sam Kinison, who I guess kind of grew up through the comedic ranks, so to speak, with Sam. In fact, when Sam Kinison was in a car accident when he was killed in 1990,
2002?
I think it was 92.
92? Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
Yep. Karl Lebov was following in the car behind, and Sam actually died in Karl's arms. Now, and there's more to this story, obviously.
Yeah.
So anyways, Karl Lebov ended up being married, and he had a child, so he thought he had a child.
Yeah.
But long story short, he and his wife divorced. They both had this common agreement that the child was not Karl's child. And it was years later, after Mr. Lebov had fallen behind on probably unreasonable child support, if you ask me, to the tune of $200,000 behind. It was not until I think 2011 or so, where the daughter, who had reached 18, she felt that Karl was not the father. Through DNA evidence, it was determined that the most likely father was Sam Kinison. And it's 99% chance that it's Sam's daughter. And the state of California would have nothing to do with overturning the back child support. They took away Mr. Lebov's driver's license, his passport. Mr. Lebov made 2 attempts on his own life during this time period because, he couldn't deal with it. He couldn't deal with, he was, in the poorhouse. For a living, he has to entertain people. He has to make people laugh. Yeah. He was depressed. This just took a toll on this guy. And I'm still in shock over this story and how I never knew about it until recently. So that's one example of how the system, even if you prove, in California, once you sign the birth certificate, you have like 2 years to disprove, after you sign it, that it's not your child. And after that, it doesn't matter what evidence, apparently, you can come up with. But this is a true story. So, and there's other examples that I'm familiar with, but that one resonates the most with me because this guy's life has really been torn apart, and and the daughter, she's okay with it. It's the state of California that isn't. So that's just one example that I'm familiar with.
If I had any friends in that situation, they were about to get divorced, and the wife they were about to get divorced from is kind of promiscuous, like to go out with her friends a lot, stay out to the wee hours of the night, what have you. I would definitely suggest to them that they get a DNA test,
right,
and maybe cut the kids, maybe a lock of the kid's hair or something like that, put that in an envelope,
right,
and get DNA testing on that. Because it's better to pay like $100. I don't know what a DNA test costs for 2 people, but getting a DNA for, let's say, $100 versus paying tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars in child support.
Right. I don't know how common it would be. I think it might be less common than you would think. But I'm sure, aside from getting DNA testing, you're going to have to, have an attorney. It's going to get ugly. It's going to get expensive, and you've got to be pretty convinced that that's not your child. But there certainly are. There's probably going to be more and more of this now that there's DNA banks or people trying to figure out, are they Native American? Are they are they European? And before you know it, everyone's DNA is flying around. And
but the thing is, a newly born child, they basically all look alike. All Caucasian infants kind of look alike. Black infants, just born infants look alike. Then like 6 months later, a year later, 2 years later, when they mature and evolve, then their traits become more prevalent.
Right.
So this daughter was probably looking more like Sam Kinison, light complected, maybe kind of a stocky woman. I don't know. I haven't seen her.
I did try to look for a picture, and I was unsuccessful. I think it was more circumstantial. It was probably more of the stories behind, maybe her parents' past, that maybe she put the dots, she connected the dots, But it's a pretty horrific story from Mr. Lebov's perspective. I can't imagine going through that. And to this day, he has no driver's license, no passport, and he's an entertainer.
Lord have mercy.
Right.
Okay, so getting with that said, getting right to the main focus of of this episode here. What is the court's definition of alimony?
Well, that's a good question. My interpretation of it, Frank, is that it's a court awarded or an agreed upon. Sometimes it's agreed upon value of money, typically in monthly installments, to an ex-spouse. It's intended to compensate for perhaps their lack of earning potential. In some states, it's there to compensate so that the individual can sustain or maintain the same lifestyle that they had during the marriage. So there's a mixture. There's also, in the state of New Hampshire, one of the purposes is rehabilitative, in the sense that it permits the individual or gives them time to re-educate themselves or to get back into the workplace without having to, I guess, scrimp by, if you will.
I see. Do you necessarily have to have come from lopsided income brackets in order to?
That's my favorite question. That's a good question.
Oh boy.
Like we talked about in the father's rights discussions, this doesn't discriminate. It does seem on the surface as if it's a rich man's, and I say man intentionally, because 97% of alimony payers are men. But it's perceived in the public as a rich man's problem. It's not. It absolutely is not. Many of the people that I'm associated with and communicate with on a regular basis are not what I would consider rich people. Some are truck drivers, some are masons, some are carpenters, hardworking people.
Yeah.
That they go home and they're scrimping by because they have to pay their ex-spouse to maintain whatever lifestyle that she was used to. So, in fact, when I talk about alimony to people that I know or acquaintances in New Hampshire, 9 out of 10 times they say to me, I didn't think that existed anymore. And it always puzzles me. It says, oh, it does exist. It's very much alive. But they don't know about it. It's not something that people talk about. A lot of men, when they're saddled with alimony, they don't want to talk about it. Either they're embarrassed or they just want to move on with their lives. But it definitely does not discriminate. Yeah, you read about, I just read about a basketball player, former Celtic basketball player.
Kevin Garnett,
who...
$100,000 a month.
Right. So the average person, the average blue-collar person,
Yeah.
or even white-collar person, looks at that and says, well, if he's paying her that much, he must have this much. It's all relative. If you take $1,000 a month out of a blue-collar person's wallet, that's painful. It hurts. It's tough. So a lot of people look at, oh, it's a Donald Trump problem. He's been through it. It's a celebrity problem. But it's real, and it can, even celebrities, it impacts. Robin Williams, it's really believed that one of the reasons why he committed suicide was over an alimony case. It's widely believed, and I've read articles about it. So it impacts, the rich, the famous, but believe me, it impacts the blue collar and lower income white collar people too.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, okay, for example, I think whether you follow sports or not, I think most people watching this right now know who Tom Brady is,
Right.
even if you have nothing to do with sports. Could Tom Brady, one of the greatest NFL quarterbacks, and he's one of the highest paid, but he happens to be married to a Victoria's Secret supermodel, Giselle Bundchen, and she supposedly makes more money than Tom Brady does. Could Tom Brady sue her for alimony?
Oh, absolutely could. Whether or not he would or not, I don't know. But
yeah, because he's a macho in a macho profession.
Right.
He'd get laughed out of the
Right, but he could make the claim that
he's bitter.
In order to sustain the same lifestyle and to have the same private jet service, and whatnot, that he needs an additional income. He could make that claim. It seems absolutely silly to me that he would, but he could. And that's what happens. And, like I said before, 96, 97% of men are saddled with this, but I know women that are saddled with this as well. And I feel bad for them because it's mostly talked about with men. It's the men's problem. It's a men's problem. And then they're over in the corner saying, yeah, me too. So it'll get worse. Before you know it, it'll get
But
worse.
I'm sure like female doctors or female lawyers, I mean, they don't necessarily hook up with, counterparts in their
Right.
profession.
Right.
So sometimes they have to settle for like maybe a factory worker or.
Right. Right. It could happen. It could be, you could have a couple, a professional couple, one decides to stay home or doesn't want to pursue the same career and is making less money. Something happens to the marriage, and bingo, alimony could be awarded to the wife in that instance. It doesn't discriminate in that sense, but it definitely is top heavy male. Make no mistake about it. It's top heavy a male issue.
Wow. And is it when you go to court for that, does the judge impose it till death do you part, or for the years, the amount of years of the marriage?
Well, that's a great question. It depends on what state you're in.
Oh.
New Hampshire, up until recently in 2018, Governor Sununu signed a bill. I guess you could call it an alimony reform bill in New Hampshire. But what it did was it defined the terms of alimony. It gave a little bit more definition to how long and how much. Whereas before, it was, I saw an article by an attorney that called it the Wild West in New Hampshire because there were
Wild West.
there was no guidelines. There were no guidelines, I should say. But you take a state like Florida. So New Hampshire's typically limited now to half the marriage if alimony is awarded, typically no more. But the judge does have discretion. In Florida, there's a thing called lifetime alimony. I've met some incredible people that live in Florida that are paying lifetime alimony, and it is absolutely brutal.
So theoretically, a Florida couple could be married just 1 year or a year and a half, and the husband will have to pay for the rest of that.
I don't know how many cases there are for that shorter duration of the marriages. Typically those marriages that are 10, 15 years in, 20, 25 years in, where basically through a divorce the marital assets are split. So that includes pensions, that includes 401k plans, IRAs and such, real estate, all that's split. And then typically the female, the wife walks away with a lifetime alimony payment. And usually the only way that goes away is if she gets married. There's no incentive to do that. Or if one of the two die. And this is true, you're retired till you die. You could be an 85-year-old man in the nursing home writing a check. It's just unbelievable. And it's funny, a lot of these folks, I don't believe in it at all. I think there should be none. I will not, come down off that. But there's a lot of folks, especially in Florida and other states, California, North Carolina, that just want to limit because right now they're in lifetime situations. I know a lot of folks in those situations, and it not only does it impact you mentally and financially, but it also alienates families. Children, grown children, take sides. So picture this: your whole life, you've raised 2 or 3 kids. They're in their 20s, have all these wonderful memories. Now they've decided to take a side, and they won't talk to you anymore. On top of having to pay all these lawyers, pay alimony for life, try to get on with your life. Now your children, don't want anything to do with you because someone may have said something or something's not true, and who knows. But you see a lot of that, a lot of alienation with adult children in these situations. So it's amazing to me.
Okay, so I don't know if you remember. I know I'm a little older than you. I don't know if you remember the trial of the what they call the trial of the century, the last century. I think it was 94, 95. O.J. Simpson, the People
Right.
versus O.J. Simpson.
Right.
So I guess they didn't have enough evidence in the criminal case, so they let him off on the criminal case. Then in the civil case, when they judged him on preponderance of evidence, they basically took everything valuable O.J. Simpson had, but they couldn't touch his pension, his
Right.
NFL retirement,
Right.
which is what he's living on right now as we speak.
Right.
But in family court, the
Yeah.
retirement is open game.
Oh, absolutely.
In alimony, can they go after your retirement in alimony payments?
Oh God, yeah. They can do just about anything they want. Let's say your retirement was split and you're behind on your alimony. There's no doubt about it. Your ex-spouse can petition the court to go after that retirement. There's been a number of individuals that flee and go to states like Texas.
Okay.
In Texas, they have alimony in Texas too. It's just not as common. But Texas, doesn't extradite very easily when it comes to these situations. So it's a place to go and, kind of recover or lick your wounds, so to speak. But eventually, through the court system, even in a place like Texas, from what I've read, I'm no expert on it, but eventually they can go after your other assets. So this is very difficult. I mean, they can go after your Social Security. At the end of the day, they can go after your Social Security. When you're, 75, 80-year-old man, they can go after your Social Security because you're behind on paying someone alimony.
And yet, this football player, O.J. Simpson, allegedly, most probably murdered 2 people, and the families of those deceased can't touch his retirement or pension.
It's amazing.
Plan. But in family court, New Hampshire, Massachusetts family court, they sure as hell can.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, family court's a lot different. People tell you all the time, family court, you talk about your amendment rights, it's all out the window. Family court is it's a kangaroo court. It really is. I mean, anything goes. I've heard tales of judges speaking their mind, saying all kinds of crazy stuff, and you just can't believe it. In a criminal court, everything's cut and dry. I'll give you an example. Family court, you produce a financial affidavit. This is what I make. This is what I earn. These are my assets. I would say, well, I don't want to put a number on it, but it's quite common people lie on those. So why not start there? Why not make that a criminal offense to lie on your financial affidavit? It's an affidavit. You shouldn't lie. You're swearing that this is what you make and this is what you spend. But time and time again, people embellish it because it gives them an advantage. Oh, if I can show that I spend more money on groceries or in my oil bill and my light bill, I might get more. But you're lying. So could you imagine in a criminal case doing that? You'd be torn to shreds. But you go into a family court and it's almost like it doesn't matter. It's expected people are going to embellish. Embellish isn't the word. Sometimes it's flat out crazy. So that's a good place to start.
Yeah.
It's a good place to start.
To the best of your knowledge, have you run into any situations like in New Hampshire on palimony suits?
No, it's funny.
Which is couples that live together. Well, I think more people live together, couples live together,
Right.
than actually get married to each other.
It's my understanding that in New Hampshire, if you're cohabitating, that first of all, you're encouraged to have an agreement. If you're cohabitating, you're buying property, you're investing money, it's a really good idea to have an agreement. But in the state of New Hampshire, there have been a few cases, but palimony itself, from what I understand, is a term that's made up by the press. I don't think it's technically a real legal term. Now, I don't have a lot of experience with palimony, but at least in New Hampshire, I know that it's very rare. And palimony, the way I look at it, would be like alimony. If let's say you lived with a girlfriend for 10 years and then you split up, you'd be paying her like alimony. It's a rare thing in New Hampshire. Other states may do that more, but in New Hampshire, they're more concerned about what happens if one person dies, what happens to the property, that sort of thing. So, but you are encouraged. I encourage anyone that's in that situation to be an adult,
Yeah.
and step up and have adult conversations with your partner about your assets together, because the chances are very great that you may not be together for
In 10 years, 15
till
years
death do you
later.
part, right? So
Yeah.
it's something I encourage. But palimony in New Hampshire, I think it's rare. I think if you live with someone for 5 or 6 years, you might have a property situation that may go to family court, but alimony or palimony, very unlikely.
Okay, some things I can justify. I can see for the justification for some situations in alimony. Let's say, for example, you've got two young people that get married like right out of high school, and one of them agrees. The wife agrees that the husband will go to college.
Right.
And stuff like that, while she takes care of like the kids and the
Right.
house and stuff like that, maybe works and helps him through college. Then when he gets like his medical degree, a law degree, he wants a divorce.
Right.
In that case, that guy should pay alimony, I think.
Well, I have to disagree with you on that. Only because first of all, when you're in a marriage, it's two adults. It's two adults.
Right.
You have to realize that marriages fail. They fail every day, and the consequences of those failures are very significant. It can impact your mental health. It can impact you financially. It can impact your future. It impacts your children. Something to be taken very seriously. When you make a decision like that, you really need to have a discussion, because one person is vulnerable.
Yeah. Or maybe if the woman, after the guy got his doctor's law degree, that he agrees to support her while she goes through college. Maybe in that instance.
Right. You can have what's called a postnuptial agreement. They don't have to be prenuptial. You don't have to, agree. Oh, before we get married, let's agree on this. During the marriage, you can start a whole new agreement.
Yeah. And
that's what I encourage people to do, to have those discussions. If the husband's going to medical school and someone's supporting him through that, then there needs to be a discussion on what happens when the marriage fails. First of all, the marital assets are divided. What it comes down to is the earning potential of one over the other. If one has stayed home with the children and didn't have a career or postponed their career, then their earning potential is different than the husband's. So there are those cases, but you can't have it both ways. You can't have that, and then you have a case where that isn't the case. It's just someone's been married to someone for 15 years, and the wife's just given, alimony. So I hear what you're saying, and I respect it, but I just think that two people you need to think about it. You need to think about it. You need to discuss it. You need to agree on it. Contract, whatever. One person's vulnerable. What happens in that situation if the man who is going to medical school dies, and they don't have any life insurance because he's going to medical school and she's working part-time? What happens if he dies?
You're right.
What happens in that case? Is the state going to swoop in and say, we're going to give you the same lifestyle you have today? It's life. And if that decision's made, that's a risky decision for that couple, and they need to make sure that I'm okay if it's agreed upon alimony, but when the court steps in, it can be brutal. I mean, it can be brutal because they're listening to this lawyer, listening to that lawyer. So I'm flat out against it all. And
okay, let's get back to like the professional athlete. You mentioned earlier Kevin Garnett having to pay $100,000 a month
right,
to his ex-wife.
right.
professional athlete, I mean, even if a professional athlete were married to a doctor or a lawyer, they probably should pay alimony to give them the same lifestyle, especially if they have kids.
Yeah.
And the kids go, they're used to playing with other millionaires' kids,
Right.
other athletes' kids, going to, I don't know, not necessarily the slums or the ghettos, but
Makes Tom Brady look pretty smart, doesn't it?
yeah, I know. I know.
I would say, I mean, a professional athlete, they marry, let's say they marry a woman who, makes $80,000 a year, and they're making $12 million a year. They've got to know what they're getting themselves into, but the woman also knows what she's getting herself into, and you read it in the paper every day. It's almost like an automatic. You marry this woman, you're married to her for 5 years, you get divorced, you're going to be paying her. It's madness.
Yeah.
But when it comes to child support, there's a formula for that. And whatever that formula is for Kevin Garnett, I'm okay with that, because everyone has the same formula. I mean, everyone pays a different amount, but I don't have a problem with the child support piece of Kevin Garnett's situation. It's the alimony. Did he provide her a certain lifestyle? Yeah. But show me where it says anywhere. Show me where it says in the Bible that someone should pay for someone else's lifestyle. I mean, why can't Kevin Garnett's ex-wife support herself?
Yeah.
What does it say you have to have a limousine pick you up every day? It doesn't say that. I mean, she knew who she was marrying. She's an adult.
Yeah. So that brings me up to my next thing, that one thing you could kind of curb if you've got lopsided incomes, you're coming from lopsided income brackets, is prenuptial agreements.
Right.
And it's almost like saying that you're better off staying single rather than pursuing a prenuptial agreement, because it sounds like you're dooming the marriage right from the get-go to fail when you sign into a prenuptial.
It would seem like that, Frank, and probably more so for a younger couple who are, in love and, oh boy, do I want to bring this up, But at the end of the day, it's a conversation between two adults. You sit down and say, this is just as good for me as it is you. You need to protect yourself. I mean, let's say, for example, you marry someone who's maybe going to inherit some money down the road, maybe 20 years down the road. And then 20 years comes and you're not getting along and there's a big lawsuit. Next thing you know, she's paying you half her family's estate. So these are questions and discussions that need to be made up front in a marriage. And it's a hard lesson to learn, but it's important that you have these discussions. And if your partner can't handle those discussions, it's a red light. It really is.
Yeah.
Is it hard to broach? Yes. It's hard to say, hey, let's sit down and talk about before we get married, if we get divorced. But it's important, and it's mature. And it's what everyone should be doing. I think everyone who gets married should go through the family courthouse for a couple of weeks and sit in the courtroom and watch this stuff. It's madness. No one thinks it's going to be them. No one ever thinks. But look at the statistics.
60% of all marriages, I think.
Right.
Well, at least New Hampshire, Massachusetts, 60% all end up in divorce.
That's right. So you have a 60% chance of getting
a very
divorced.
good chance of getting
So
divorced.
discuss it, and and have a discussion about postnuptials. Let's revisit this in 2 or 3 years, but really do it. Don't just talk about it. It's going to be a lot healthier for your marriage. It's going to be a lot healthier for you in the long run if something should happen, and for both of you, really. It's not easy. You're right. It's not an easy thing to bring up, but it's a necessity. It's really necessary. Even if you have nothing, someday you're gonna have something.
Yeah. And let's take the president of the United States. Okay, so he's two divorces, and the lady he's married now, a beautiful model that's probably young enough to be his daughter.
Probably.
But the first two wives, I mean, they're not billionaires as a result of the divorce, but they're probably very comfortable women.
Right. Right.
You give them a couple million and they're,
right.
unless you're stupid with their money, should have,
Right.
you know.
But how does that translate down to a blue collar construction worker? Well, I know a few guys that they're paying about $1,500, $1,800 a month. Okay, and someone, oh, geez, they must really make good money. Well, yeah, they're working overtime to make it all happen. They're living in an apartment. Meanwhile, their ex is free to make whatever they want to make, whatever. Sky's the limit. It's debilitating. It's not just the Trumps and the celebrities and the sports
Athletes,
and the athletes. That's what you see. You see so and so is suing for alimony for $30 million, but the poor guy that's paying $20,000 a year, it's tough. It's very difficult.
Okay, so moving right along, you said that there was changes. Well, I think it was last December they made changes in the alimony law in New Hampshire.
Right.
So you're happy with it?
Well, actually, no. I'm not happy with it. I'm hard to please on this topic, but I actually tried to contact the governor. Didn't have any success. But what the governor did, what wasn't the governor's bill? He signed it, but it now has a term. It's you pay if you're assigned alimony. It's typically no more than half the duration of the marriage. So if you're married for 30 years, you could be looking at a 15-year alimony duration. The money is typically based on 30% of the difference in earnings. So if someone made $100,000 and someone makes 25, the difference is 75, so it'll be 30% of $75,000 for 15 years in that first instance. So that was something that was never there. Believe me, Florida, North Carolina, they would kill to have that alimony bill. Right now they've got this lifetime thing they're dealing with. Where the bill falls short is really two places. One is that there is really no milestone in respect of a lot of alimony in New Hampshire is rehabilitative. Like until you get back on your feet, till you get back into the job market, till you can re-educate yourself, get a new degree or whatever. But there's no benchmark. There's no going back to court and saying, how you doing on that? How's things going? Well, I went on vacation and I bought this property and I did this. I bought a new car. Well, what about the school? So it's for rehabilitation, but there's no benchmark for it. There's no way to measure it. There's no way to revisit it. In my opinion, it should be looked at. And if it's not happening, take it away because it's being used for other things. It's being used for other things. The other thing is cohabitation. So in the state of New Hampshire, you surrender your alimony if you're proven to be cohabitating with another partner. So let's say your ex-wife is getting alimony, she's living with her boyfriend. Those are grounds for discontinuing the alimony. You have to prove it. She could then say, oh, I broke it off with this guy, and I want my alimony back. And it just comes right. But that's what the law says. Now, you've got to challenge all that through court. But proving cohabitation is difficult because what incentive does your ex-wife have to show that she's cohabitating? Zero. She doesn't. She wants the alimony, right? So there's a lot of that. That's a big theme throughout the country. I know a lot of people through the groups I belong to that are trying to prove cohabitation where the ex is living with a guy and his car's registered for that address and he's paying the cable bill, but the court's not buying that he's living there. It's so what is cohabitation? So I think that really needs to be defined. If you're living with someone, or it seems like you're living with someone, why should you continue? It's no different than being married. So these are the two things that the bill is missing. It's missing that benchmark for for the rehabilitation, and it's missing a really good, solid definition of cohabitation.
Incredible.
And it's also, I might add, after alimony ends in New Hampshire, you could pay it for 15 years. Your ex-wife has up to 5 years after it ends to ask for an extension. Up to 5 years after it ends. So you think it's over. She might struggle, prove to the court, oh, I can't do this without Frank's money, right?
All right.
And then bang, you're back paying. So that's another thing that wasn't addressed was the extension or the startup again of the alimony. So again,
Okay, no. One thing that's changed too, I think I think on the federal alimony bill, you no longer can claim alimony on your taxes.
that's correct. I'm glad you brought that up. That's huge because it used to allow
Some relief, a little
some
bit of relief.
right? But think about this. The alimony payers were deducting the alimony amounts off their tax liabilities. The receivers were supposed to report that income. Well, statistically, not all that alimony received was being reported. But if you really think about it, the alimony payers are making the money, so if they pay taxes on that amount of money that they're given as alimony, the federal government gets more money. It's more tax revenue. So it was a Donald Trump, let's cut this tax break for the alimony payers, and they have to claim that money. The federal government gets more money. The alimony recipient, technically, they could receive $50,000 a month. Claim they make zero money.
What a racket.
Right. So it's really tough now because it used to be where people could maybe negotiate a little bit with the alimony, and knowing that they're going to have that tax deduction, might be willing to, all right, I'll do this because of the tax deduction. So now that's out of play. It's completely out of play. Anyone that was assigned alimony prior to the tax legislation, the new tax bill, still is under the old plan, but anyone from that point on can't claim it. Yeah, it's disappointing, really is, especially from a guy like Donald Trump.
Yeah, you would
Right.
think knows about it.
He probably knows about that little tax break there, but yeah, and you didn't hear a word about that in the press. It wasn't on the news. It's just another blow to the alimony payer.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, the media is big on the Me Too movement, so they favor women as victims and stuff like that. So they're probably going to shy away from a story like that.
Oh, I'm sure the media, absolutely, yeah. They're not going to show you the blue collar construction guy, and whose wife is out not working, going to the casino, right? They're gonna show you the Donald Trumps and the Kevin Garnetts and whatever celebrity, and it's just they make so much money, it doesn't matter.
Okay, so moving right along, we mentioned what did we mention before? Oh yeah, that in child support cases, the judges aren't really concerned about why the couple, especially if there was like infidelity or adultery involved in the separation. Does that make any difference when it comes to alimony?
Based on my experiences, no. It's almost like, at least in New Hampshire, from the folks I've talked to and through my own experiences, they look at it, here's the marital assets, let's cut those and piece those up and spread those out. And let's look at the alimony law. Can the individual afford it? And does the other individual require it? And it makes no difference if one cheated on the other. Although there is an exception. In New Hampshire, I believe if you can prove adultery, you get 55%.
You told me that, yeah. You mentioned it in the last show.
55% of the marital assets versus 45%. But I would say the hoops that you have to jump through to prove that, aside from being ugly, are probably pretty expensive.
Yeah.
So, a judge's typically don't sit there and say, Frank, your wife cheated on you. We're going to give you a break. It doesn't work that way. It's, you make this much money, and
Yeah.
she hasn't worked in 10 years, and sorry, but you're going to support her while she's with her new boyfriend.
Unbelievable.
It's a bitter pill.
I can imagine.
It's a bitter pill to swallow, because you're paying someone to be with someone else, and you know that money is not being used. You don't know it, but you assume that it's not being used for rehabilitative purposes. So it's tough.
Unbelievable.
Right.
Okay, so is there any groups, any like the Facebook on the for fathers' rights? There's like the fathers' rights movement of New Hampshire, and they have a Facebook page. Is there any alimony support groups on Facebook or anywhere on the social media?
There's a ton of them.
There's a ton of them.
And I have a few written down, but before I read them to you, anyone watching your program that is either a payer or thinks they might have to be in a situation where they're going to pay, or they know someone that's going to end up paying, reach out to these groups. It's the absolute best thing I ever could have done.
Yeah, when you're networking like that.
Now, this is going to sound awful, but when you find folks that are in worse shape than you, somehow that makes you feel a little bit better, but you also feel compassion for them as well. But you learn a lot.
Yes.
You'll learn a lot. And then the next thing you know, this story is similar to my story, this is similar to mine. And there's all kinds of moving parts. In Florida, for example, and I will get to those in a second, there's a movement in Florida to change legislation. There's some pretty talented people in these groups. They're not just people who are just complaining about paying. There's some pretty talented folks in these groups trying to make a difference, trying to change the laws. It'd be a lot better if it was a national thing, but it's a state to state to state to state. It's hard. Florida is certainly a place that I've been watching and tracking, because they have the lifetime, and they have a lot of huge population in Florida. So I'm watching that closely, and I think I'm hoping that there'll be change, and I actually try to help these people. I can't help it. But so some of the groups that I belong to, there's one called Alimony and Justice, End Lifetime Alimony, Permanent Alimony Slavery. Sounds kind of ugly.
Isn't there a parallel, getting off the subject, isn't there a parallel between like alimony and slavery?
I think so. And there'll probably be people that laugh at that, but when you're working every day to pay for someone else's lifestyle directly, I'm not talking, we all work and we pay for people's lifestyles through our taxes. This is a direct, okay, you're sponsoring this person. I've looked up the definition of slavery, and it sure sounds like it to me. Picture yourself right now going through a divorce, and for the rest of your life paying your ex-wife.
I can't imagine that.
Right. And and people might think, well, that sounds kind of cruel. What's if the person's this or that or the other? Like I said, you're a grown-up. You're both grown-ups. You both have marital assets. She walked away with half of the retirement, the pensions, 401ks, the IRAs, the proceeds of the sale of the home, or maybe she's in the marital home. Every situation is different, but I'm against it all. I just think that people need to support themselves, and I think if you're in a situation where you've allowed someone to take care of you, you've made yourself vulnerable, and that's not good. Not good at all. There was one more, United Front for Alimony Reform, but there's a lot of them. There were some in New Hampshire, but they were relatively small groups. But you can go around the country, and the ones in Florida are really good. I've learned a lot from folks in those groups.
Ah, okay. And you highly recommend them? Well, then again, I would assume if you go on Facebook.com and they have a little search box on top of their site, if you type in alimony,
God, yeah.
I'm sure all those you just mentioned will pop up.
Right.
One thing I found fascinating in some of the exchanges you sent to me was I think there was a movie by the same name, The First Wives Club,
Right.
with Diane Keaton. Diane Keaton played in Mr. Goodbar, Looking for Mr. Goodbar, as well as like most of the Godfather movies.
Right.
She was married to Al Pacino's Michael Corleone's character.
Right.
And but anyway, it's the First Wives Club. And this is for wives who are about to go through alimony,
Right.
and they're networking, getting ideas from each other.
Right. Yeah, it's amazing. So the First Wives Clubs are the wives of the alimony recipients who want more, who are fighting to keep what they're getting. Then you have the Second Wives Club, who are the new spouses, a lot of times girlfriends of the men who are payers. I'm friends with a lot of these women in the Second Wives Clubs. They tend to be pretty ferocious. They do a lot of,
Yeah.
they fight. They're in there fighting. So it's just funny. You've got this one group like, I want more, 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 and then you've got this other group of women who I just admire these people. They're fighting to end it, and these are women saying, why is this woman getting paid to sit home? It's remarkable, and I've got to give these women credit, and the women in these groups that are paying. They really dig in, and a lot of these women can't marry the person that they love, because once they marry this individual, they're now on the hook to have to pay, because it's now one asset, right? There's a case in Florida where this individual's on the hook for alimony. It's a ridiculous, ridiculous case. His girlfriend, he's not even married, is being sued by this guy's ex-wife and her attorneys. Her business was being sued. She wasn't even married to him. She was dating him. She's the girlfriend. So now you've got women in the First Wives Club. It should be maybe the First Girlfriends Club, or second, excuse me, I'm getting confused, the Second Girlfriends Club, where they're hesitant to marry until these alimony cases are settled. But it's a
Are they
vicious
on
cycle.
Facebook?
The First Wives Clubs, yes, they are. Right.
So if I went on Facebook, I haven't done it yet, on the search box, First Wives Club, and you'd see a whole mess of them
You'd
come
find
up.
some, absolutely, yeah. And I'm sure there's people that troll. You're probably familiar with trolling, where someone might pretend to be someone else. I'm sure the alimony reform groups that I belong to, there's maybe, I don't want to be a conspiracy guy, but maybe you have first wives in there trolling and try to figure out what's going on. They're pretty well vetted, though. They do a good job vetting people. But it's a really good place. I highly recommend it. Go to these sites, get involved, get to know some of these people, share stories. It can be helpful. I've seen people have some good success in these groups. But yeah, the First Wives Club it's amazing to me that we want more.
Is it all on Facebook or Twitter? I guess these social media groups now,
Right.
they're really catching up on, I should say, stomping their foot on what they call hate speech. And anything that even remotely smells like hate speech,
Right.
they'll yank off postings, or
Right.
maybe yank off a site.
Well, these are private groups, so
Closed groups.
the closed groups. So you have to apply to be in the group.
Okay,
And
so
if there's anything going on in that group, it's you get tossed out.
okay.
And believe it or not, I mean, the people are, for the most part, pretty civil. There's no one saying, I want to harm my ex-wife or something. It doesn't,
Yeah.
they just don't. They're pretty civil. Yeah, there probably are some trolls here and there that cross the lines and try to figure out what's going on here.
But what I'm saying is, okay, is there like what they call firstwivesclub.com, where they avoid Facebook and Twitter
there may
totally?
be. I don't know. They may
And
be.
they have the right to say anything they could get sued on something like that too,
I suppose.
if they make death threats against somebody's husband, or
They have enough money to hire enough lawyers if they're the First Wives Clubs, right? Right.
Unbelievable.
Right. Yeah, it is. It is crazy.
Okay, so anyway, time flies when you're having fun, eh, Tim? My producer told me that we have, about 3 minutes-ish left in this episode. Is there anything we talked about which you'd like to elaborate on, or something we have not brought up which you'd like to bring up at this point?
I think I would just like, again, anyone watching your program, if you have children, that are about to get married, have a discussion with them, because this is absolutely brutal stuff. We talked about parental alienation in our father's rights discussion. This is right up the same alley. This destroys families. It destroys relationships with grandchildren. The best thing you can do is sit down with your children who are, young adults that are thinking about getting married, and say, look, first of all, watch Frank's program, right?
There you go.
And then secondly, come to some agreements. Discuss what's going to happen. If you stay home, what could happen? What could happen if you stay home with the children and I go and get this career, and next thing you know, I meet somebody, and these are things that all have to be discussed, because alimony is debilitating, and before you know it, you as a parent, you're chipping in for the lawyer's fees, while your son's living with you or whatever, and talk to your children about it. It's, and again, I want to reiterate, this is not a rich man's issue. It is not. You'd be surprised. People that are paying, who have paid, have been through this, they just don't talk about it. But I'm bound and determined to help and do whatever I can to, see if we can slow it down, eradicate it.
Well, I wish you the best of luck, Tim. And if anybody has any questions or concerns, they can email Tim Bickford at Comcast.net. And I'm sure you'll get back with them,
Right.
And for their, prod them in the right direction if you don't have an answer right away.
Sure.
And that should hopefully take care of them or lead them in the right direction.
Sure will.
So anyway, I hope this has been a great episode for you, ladies and gentlemen. Please join us again for another episode of Frankly Speaking. Thank you very much.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.